Americans, what is your insurance horror story? My dad is an oncologist, and he says there's been an uptick in the number of arbitrary denials by insurance companies for claims that should absolutely be covered under the patient's plan. When they're appealed, they'll often eventually be approved, but the whole process moves really slowly, which can be a death sentence given early treatment is critical when dealing with cancer. It almost seems like the insurance companies are delaying crap on purpose, in hopes that the patient will die before they have to pay for treatment. Story 2. My father got hospitalized for a week from heart failure, literally guaranteed death without getting medical help. Lungs were filled with fluid and he was effectively drowning. Insurance decided that the entire stay was completely unwarranted because, according to them, it didn't seem like he was sick enough. They didn't want to cover anything related to it. While we were eventually successful, it took years to fight. Bill was in the six figures. Story 3. My wife had an emergency surgery for spontaneous retinal detachment, literally minutes away from going blind. Insurance tried not to pay because she had not gotten pre-authorization, and then after that claimed a spontaneous event was a pre-existing condition. This thread is going to get real depressing real fast, isn't it? Insurance companies not doing what they're supposed to do is infuriating because the whole privatized healthcare thing is kind of reliant on insurance existing and doing its job to work properly for any people, except for the people in charge of the insurance companies and private hospitals, you know what I mean? These private prices are jacked up so much because of the insurance existing, which is already a huge issue, but let's say that has to exist. If healthcare has to be privatized, and that's that, then insurance companies need to do their job and do it well. But I don't know why I'm ranting about this so hard. I think I would be hard-pressed to find people who disagree with me. Story 4. 2008, went in a hospital for ruptured intestine due to Crohn's. Airlifted to Mayo Clinic high on fentanyl for the pain. Spent a month in the hospital. Came out with no colon, looking like a tragedy survivor. Wife felt like something was wrong. Went into OBGYN to check on baby. No heartbeat at 8 months. They induced labor. Buried son. Received a bill for $110,000 for Mayo Clinic, which the insurance company denied. Received a bill for $20,000 for abortion, which the insurance company denied. Spent 4 months of daily calls with hospital and insurance company fighting charges all the way down to $12,000. Story 5. Not me, but someone I know was diagnosed with cancer in her early 30s. Her oncologist found cancer cells in her lymph nodes, indicating that it had metastasized, so he ordered a full-body MRI to assess where it had spread to. Her insurance denied it because they said she was too young to be considered at risk, despite her actually having active cancer. They did eventually approve it, but not without a lot of pressure from her doctor. Story 6. My father was a doctor with a pre-existing condition before Obamacare, which meant the only health insurance he could get was through his state's pool of last resort. It took 30% of his income as he was self-employed and working in a very rural area. He was the only physician in his specialty for 75 miles, and when things got desperate for his patients, would allow them to pay in piano lessons, vegetables, or whatever, all instead of cash if they needed to. He had a stroke and died on his bathroom floor, but lived on life support for 4 more days. $350,000 later, including a $70,000 helicopter flight for 30 miles, a man who dedicated his life to medicine and donated all of his organs to science died less than broke because of healthcare costs. Story 7. My wife just got her 3rd denial for authorization from UHC for an MRI on her hip that her doctor has been trying to get her for over a year. The first reason? She didn't submit x-rays. Submitted x-rays, reapplied. Second reason? She hadn't done PT before the request. Submitted evidence that she has done PT on and off for 7 years to no improvement, reapplied. Third reason, she needs to have x-rays done first. This AI auto-rejection cruelty is par for the course. Story 8. My girlfriend had kidney failure as a child and had been in dialysis for over 15 years. She graduated college and was working as a teacher. She had to stop due to complications with her condition and go on disability. This was prior to Obamacare, so we tried to get coverage from all the insurance companies since it was impossible for anyone to afford dialysis without insurance. Every single company declined to cover her due to her pre-existing condition. They essentially told her she was too expensive to keep alive. Story 9. I got super sick when I was 7 and had an extended hospital stay. Unfortunately, it happened during a brief lapse in my dad's employment history, so we were briefly between insurance. I later found out my parents went bankrupt, and my dad had to take on higher-paying jobs he hated in order to pay it off. He eventually worked himself to death, almost literally. He worked so many hours of overtime. He fell asleep at the wheel, drove off the road, and crashed into a tree. Worst day of my life. He should have been enjoying his retirement by now. Instead, he's been gone for years, and my mom still struggles with depression and being a widow. America needs universal health care. Story 10. Daughter was born prematurely around Christmas. Spent 3 weeks in the NICU. After a week and a half, she was downgraded from NICU level 2 to NICU level 1. Nothing changed. She was in the same unit, in the same bed. She was just no longer on a feeding tube. Insurance counted her downgrade from NICU 2 to NICU 1 as a new admission rather than a continuation of care. Because we had crossed calendar years, her new admission was subject to a new calendar year of copays, deductibles, and max out-of-pocket expenses. That meant that for a single 3-week NICU visit, we were charged max copay, max deductible, and max out-of-pocket expenses against 2 years of coverage. Fought it for over a year before the hospital threatened to take it to collections, so we eventually gave up and paid it off. We had a good policy, and the max out-of-pocket for each year was only $4,500, for a total of $9,000 for an NICU bill that exceeded $350,000. But that extra $4,500 for a second year we knew we shouldn't have been required to pay sure stung. Story 11. My daughter was born early and spent 7 weeks in the NICU. When she got out, we got a bill for something like $400,000, and it took months to get the hospital and insurance company to sort it out. We have stacks of paperwork showing that everything has been settled, but every so often we get a letter or a call from one of them because they randomly decided that we still owe them $100,000. I don't know if some people in America realize how ridiculous the prices sound. I'm sure a lot do, but there are some people who are probably like, yeah, $400,000, that's a lot, right? No, that's a lot. $400,000 in the vast majority of the world would be well over 4 years of annual salary on average. Even in America it is. That is absurd. Ridiculous. So for whatever reason your insurance company decides to say, nah, and you have to pay $400,000 out of pocket, you are literally almost always better off filing for bankruptcy instead. Disgusting system, man. Will I stop ranting about this in this video? Maybe, maybe not. What can I say? I'm Canadian. Story 12. Far less severe than what I'm sure will populate this thread, but a terrific example of the nonsense that is American health insurance. During COVID, I was working for a Hawaii-based organization, but on the East Coast. Someone in my office popped positive for COVID, so everyone in the office went to a testing site to get tested. My claim for the COVID test was denied because I didn't go to one of the approved testing sites for my insurer. All of the approved sites were in Hawaii. At the time, you couldn't travel to Hawaii without proof of a negative COVID test. So the only way I could get the cost of a COVID test covered was if I went to an approved testing site. But in order to travel to any of the approved testing sites, I needed to show a negative COVID test. Story 13. I work for a DME company. We exist solely for the shareholders in hopes of packaging and selling the company to a larger company like Medtronic. Our income is largely, perhaps mostly, based on overbilling Medicare. We waive patient costs all the time on the basis that we will still make record profits year over year if Medicare pays their part less than half of the time they're asked to. This is happening at scale across the entire healthcare industry. The system is utterly vampiric. Healthcare could be so much cheaper if there wasn't an entire for-profit industry dedicated to exploiting our poorly constructed state health system. Story 14. I got hurt at work, suffered an amputation on site with no pain meds. They slowly pulled my toes off with my crushed boot. My family lost our health insurance at the end of the month because I wasn't working. But it's okay, it was only $2,500. Story 15. As a Brit staring down the scope in horror at the US, I genuinely wonder how any of you survive after things like this. Not only my condolences for lost loved ones, irreplaceable property lost, etc., but my most profound respect for enduring it all. My country is on what feels like the brink of a different form of collapse. Our politicians are too busy arguing over freaking sandwiches to realize the writing on the wall. Collectively, something needs to change, and it's not going to come from government. I wish you all the best, honestly. Now, hold on. Was this a call for revolution from the British? Well, that's certainly a switch up from history, huh? Story 16. Not me, the mother of my wife's work friend. Her house outside of Gulfport, Alabama was flattened by Katrina, and she spent the rest of her life living in hotels and rentals while her home insurance and the government managed flood insurance argued over whether a storm surge is wind or flood damage. Story 17. I moved to Georgia and had to apply for Medicaid because my job didn't offer insurance. I got an official letter stating, "You qualify for Medicaid. However, we are not going to give it to you." Since Georgia had refused to participate in the federal Medicaid expansion, I went without insurance for the next 2 years and almost died. Story 18. Husband was getting a stem cell transplant to treat his stage 4 lymphoma. The morning of the procedure, the hospital realized we didn't have insurance because he had recently lost or quit his job / ran out of FMLA, and the previous employer had not submitted the paperwork to Cobra. We had to contact them to fax a form, and I had to write a check for $1,600 to cover the previous 2 months of Cobra so his transplant could proceed. If my sister hadn't have gone to high school with that transplant coordinator, and I didn't have $2,000 in my bank, he wouldn't be here today. Story 19. I worked in billing, and the amount of patients scammed by Medicare regarding their yearly physical. Yes, it's free, but if you deviate on anything, it's not free and you're charged for it. So don't tell your doctor your knee hurts or you have a hangnail during that visit. Also, check your insurance for colonoscopies. If you do the Cologuard at home test and it comes back positive, so you have to go in and have an actual colonoscopy, it may not be covered as preventative and you'll get charged. Story 20. Definitely not as bad as others for sure, but being a type 1 diabetic, you are basically at the mercy of drug prices. South Dakota also only has 2, if you're not on a corporate plan, health insurance companies, which ironically are part of the 2 health systems in the state, Avera and Sanford. My insulin copay seems to change constantly. The real issue that's stuck in my craw is my blood work. I went to a small clinic / hospital to get work done and was charged $800 plus for routine blood work that typically costs me around $30. Called the clinic and asked why it was so expensive. They said it was because the test was taken in the hospital and not the clinic. That's just their policy. This is a while ago, so I'm not entirely sure if it was a policy of the medical side or insurance side, but since Avera is both the healthcare and insurance company, I guess it doesn't matter much. Months later, I mentioned this to my endocrinologist, who then mentioned Quick Labs. It's an unadvertised blood test that covers everything I need for $75. Of course, this is unadvertised. Anyway, my fellow South Dakota diabetics, ask for Avera Quick Labs if your current blood work is ungodly expensive. No appointment necessary at participating facilities. Story 21. I've gone 10 plus years with a rotting wisdom tooth since I haven't been able to afford the extraction. Got denied at my last job, ended up finding another where I would qualify, after 6 months probation. Story 22. So I'm a diabetic. My doctor wanted Lantus insulin, but insurance wanted another cheaper insulin that's not as effective. So my doctor doubled the dosage. So my insurance decided to make the dosage 2 times 14 days worth, 2 weeks a month, instead of 30 days worth. So I had to pay the copay twice a month. That meant 28 days a month, and most months except February have more than 28 days. I ended up having to ration my insulin, and the copay went from $25 for 14 days to $65 for 14 days in less than 2 years. That meant I had to go to the pharmacy, stand in line, and get refills every 14 days, and the pharmacy ran out a lot, so I had to come back. I can't drive, so I had to walk a mile to CVS down the road for this and other medicines. I just started buffering a week at a time just so I could deal with this inconsistency. "How come your blood sugar never goes down?" the doctor asked. I told him, and he shook his head, saying this was so common. He tried swapping insulin types or increasing the dosages, but insurance said no. My A1C was like 10. Then I ended up on TRICARE because I married someone in the military. I got Lantus, Trulicity, and boom, my A1C dropped to 6 in less than a year. I know the military has efficiency issues, but I pay nothing out of pocket in TRICARE. No copay, no prescriptions, and no fees. It's like $58 a month from my wife's pension for the both of us. I mean, socialized medicine will work in this country. The companies just don't want it to. When my first wife died, the military officer was my second marriage. Her insurance dropped her because she was dead. Then they sent her a $230,000 hospital bill for her last week of life because she was on a ventilator in critical care. No, I don't live in a communal property state, but they sent her to collections and heavily implied illegally that I had to pay. I didn't. Let me repeat this. They sent my dead wife to collections, then lied that I had to pay because she was dead. Bill collectors called me at work, called our son, and even my sister. Not her sister, my sister. I had legal notices and bills for her in her name coming as late as 8 years after her death. In fact, twice she had summons to go to court, then a summons for arrest for failure to appear in court. However, that sheriff had common sense and took her death certificate. He even said he was sorry for bothering me. Freaking crazy. I feel bad for law enforcement that has to deal with that. I'm sure 90+% of them are like, this is so stupid, man. She's dead. How are we going to threaten to arrest someone who is deceased? Way to twist the knife in this man who lost his wife. Unbelievable. Story 23. For my first pregnancy, everything was covered under my plan without issue. For my second on the same plan, I figured it would be the same. Turns out the company decided that they would only cover office visits and no lab work was covered in that. No blood work, no ultrasounds, nothing. When I called to get clarification, they were super vague and would just keep repeating, office visits are fully covered. But what does an office visit include? Office visits are fully covered. I was directed to check my plan, which was just as vague. After paying for everything out of pocket, my child had the audacity to be born 2 months into the new plan year, so we had to start all over with the deductible. Story 24. Not American, Canadian here. 2 years ago, we rented a house near a beach in the Northeast USA. We have 3 kids, and our youngest was 1 year old at the time. She couldn't stop crying. It was insane. We tried Tylenol and everything we could, but at a point we said, let's go to the hospital. I wasn't happy about spending 12 hours in an emergency room during our vacation, but whatever. Turns out it legit took 15 minutes in and out of the hospital. I couldn't believe how fast and efficient it was, and everyone was happy. 6 months later, we received a letter from a collection agency. We owed $18,000 USD for that 15-minute visit. We had insurance and we never paid it, but had to fight until recently to get a final letter from them saying we owe nothing. Our insurance company was not happy with how the hospital billed them and decided to request a revised invoice. Hospital basically said screw off and charged us instead. You almost got me, OP. I thought you were going to praise American healthcare because it was so fast. And hey, the speed is definitely a merit, but surely there's some middle ground between 15-hour ER waits and, this, $18,000 bills. Story 25. Got a bill from an anesthesiologist a week shy of 18 months after my kid was born for $2,000, and notably 2 weeks into the calendar year. Insurance tried to tell me that the bill would count as the current calendar year instead of when services happened. Took a couple months of just try and take my money phone calls, but I eventually won. $0. By the way, this was United Healthcare. Story 26. Not much of a horror story, but more of a how the hell is this a thing? It doesn't make any sense type of story. I had to get a type of scan. It was actually cheaper to pay out of pocket than to go through my insurance. It would have cost me an extra $50-ish. $250 versus $300. I don't get it. Story 27. My daughter was born with cystic fibrosis. We knew she was going to have this due to genetic testing that was done before she was born. She was denied insurance the day she was admitted into the NICU because she had a pre-existing condition, since it was known in the womb that she would have CF. I had to fight with insurance literally the day she was born. This was shortly before Obamacare ended that bullcrap. P.S. I will never vote for a Republican again in my life for so much as a dog catcher for how they demonized it because a Democrat passed it. Story 28. Not mine, but I was speaking to a doctor who was talking about how he considered quitting after he had to fight insurance about giving people life-changing migraine treatments with proven efficiency instead of cheaper, minimal to no evidence-based medicines that did jack all. I personally don't get how people can work for insurance companies. Like, sure, I'm sure a lot of people, you do what you have to do to pay the bills, right? It's the cruel reality of life. But the people at the top who are directly benefiting off of people suffering, denying claims anywhere they can, how do you sleep at night? Anyway, before I go on more Canadian rants, that's the last story for today. I hope you have a wonderful day or night wherever you are, and I will see you in the next one.